What happens when America's sweetheart, Kelly Clarkson, finds herself in the most uncomfortable interview of her career? What began as a routine morning show appearance quickly spiraled into a moment of live television. Chaos that left viewers stunned and studio executives scrambling. This is the story of how a simple question about her personal life triggered a confrontation so intense that Kelly Clarkson walked off the Today Show set, leaving Craig Melvin speechless and producers in complete panic. T. The morning started like any other at NBC Studios in New York City. Kelly Clarkson, fresh off another successful season of her daytime talk show, was scheduled for a standard promotional interview with Craig Melvin. She was there to discuss her latest album, upcoming tour dates, and continued success as a television host. The atmosphere in the studio was light and positive, with crew members chatting casually as they prepared for what everyone assumed would be another feel-good segment. Kelly arrived in high spirits, greeting everyone warmly and joking with makeup artists and production assistants. Known for her down-to-earth charm, she made everyone around her feel at ease. Craig, equally professional and prepared, reviewed his notes, looking forward to interviewing one of America's most beloved entertainers. When the two settled into their chairs under the familiar glow of the Today Show lights. The cameras began rolling for what was expected to be a cheerful 8-minute conversation. The opening moments went exactly as planned. Craig welcomed Kelly with his usual enthusiasm, highlighting her recent achievements. "Kelly, it's always such a pleasure to have you here," he said with a grin. "You've been absolutely killing it with your talk show, and now you've got this incredible new album. Tell us about the inspiration behind these songs." Kelly's face lit up as she spoke passionately about her creative process and how personal experiences had shaped her new music. She described working with different songwriters and explained that this album represented a fresh chapter in her artistic journey. The conversation flowed naturally, with both seeming comfortable and engaged. Kelly laughed easily at Craig's jokes, offered thoughtful answers about her career, and appeared completely at ease. But then, as the segment progressed, Craig decided to steer the discussion in a more personal direction. "Now, I have to ask," he began, leaning slightly forward. "Your fans are always curious about your personal life. You've been pretty open about your divorce and how that affected you. How are you handling everything now? Are you seeing anyone special?" At first, the question sounded harmless, the sort of personal curiosity celebrities often face on morning shows. Kelly's smile stayed fixed, but a subtle shift in her demeanor betrayed her discomfort. She paused slightly before responding, her tone still polite but edged with restraint. "You know, Craig, I'm in a really good place right now," she said evenly. "I'm focused on my kids, my career, and just taking things one day at a time. I think that's the healthiest approach for me right now." Craig, either not noticing the tension or choosing to ignore it, decided to press further. "That's wonderful to hear," he said lightly. "But there have been some rumors lately about you and a certain someone. Any truth to those stories?" Kelly's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, the easy warmth in her eyes giving way to something colder. In that instant, the interview's tone shifted completely, and what had begun as a friendly conversation was about to turn into one of the most talked-about moments in today's show history. Kelly Clarkson's tone remained composed but firm as she replied, "I prefer to keep my private life private. Craig, I think my fans understand and respect that boundary." Her response was polite yet resolute, the kind of gentle redirection seasoned celebrities use when steering away from sensitive topics. Most interviewers would have recognized the cue and smoothly moved on. However, Craig Melvin seemed intent on getting something more personal. "I completely understand wanting privacy," he continued, "but your fans love you and they want to see you happy. Surely you can give us just a little hint about what makes Kelly Clarkson happy these days, outside of work." Kelly's jaw tightened slightly, her hands clasping together in her lap. The camera caught the subtle shift in her body language. Okay. Though viewers at home might not have immediately recognized the warning signs of her growing frustration. "What makes me happy," she replied, her voice still measured but noticeably cooler, "is being able to come on shows like this and talk about my music and my career without having every aspect of my personal life dissected for entertainment value." The tension in the studio became palpable. Crew members exchanged uneasy glances as the tone shifted from lighthearted to tense. Craig either missed the change or chose to ignore it. "Kelly, I think you might be reading too much into this," he said with a forced laugh. "We're just having a friendly conversation here. Your fans tune in because they care about you as a person, not just as a performer." Kelly's eyes flashed with something close to anger, though she kept her composure. "And I appreciate that support, Craig. I really do. But caring about someone doesn't mean they're entitled to know every detail of their private life." The exchange was clearly growing uncomfortable. Craig seemed to think he was conducting a standard celebrity interview, while Kelly was feeling her boundaries being tested. "I'm not asking for every detail," Craig countered, his tone sharpening slightly. "I'm asking basic questions any celebrity would expect in an interview. This is what you signed up for when you became a public figure." Kelly's face flushed as her patience began to fray. Her voice, steady but edged with irritation, carried through the studio with a firmness rarely seen from her on camera. "What I signed up for was to promote my album and talk about my work. I didn't sign up to justify my personal choices or provide gossip fodder for people who think my private life is their entertainment." The warm, easy atmosphere from earlier had completely evaporated. Craig looked momentarily taken aback, but pressed on anyway. "Kelly, I think you're being a little defensive here," he said, his professional smile faltering. "I'm not trying to invade your privacy. I'm doing my job asking questions our viewers want answered. You've been open about your personal struggles in the past. So I'm not sure why this particular topic is off limits." Kelly's hands gripped the arms of her chair tightly as her voice took on a sharp, deliberate tone. "There's a difference between choosing to share your struggles to help other people and having someone push you to reveal things you're not ready to discuss. I thought you would understand that distinction." The crew grew increasingly uneasy as the exchange escalated, some averting their eyes while the cameras kept rolling. The segment was supposed to be wrapping up, but neither seemed willing to back down. "Look, I respect your right to privacy," Craig said, still trying to maintain control. "But you have to admit that when you put yourself out there, as a public figure, especially someone who hosts a talk show where you discuss personal topics with guests, people are going to be curious about your own life." Kelly's expression hardened, and her voice dropped to a calm yet cutting tone. "So, because I create a safe space for my guests to share their stories, that means I've somehow forfeited my own right to boundaries. That's an interesting perspective, Craig." Flustered. Craig stumbled over his reply. "That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that you can't expect people not to be interested in your personal life when you've built your brand around being relatable and authentic." Kelly leaned forward slightly, her voice gaining strength and conviction as she responded, the tension between them thick enough to silence the entire studio. "My brand," Kelly began, her voice steady but laced with quiet intensity, "as you put it, is built on being genuine about my experiences when I choose to share them. It's built on respecting people and creating authentic connections. It's not built on feeding people's curiosity just because they want to be entertained by my personal business." The tension in the studio was now impossible to ignore. Crew members exchanged uneasy glances, and someone off camera whispered frantically into a headset, likely relaying the escalating situation to producers in the control room. Craig seemed to realize he was treading dangerous waters, but still appeared unwilling to back down. "I understand your position, Kelly," he said cautiously, "but I have to be honest with you. This kind of reaction to basic questions about your personal life is going to make people wonder what you're trying to hide." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Kelly's reaction was immediate. Her face flushed with anger, and though her tone remained measured, her voice carried a force that filled the room. "What I'm trying to hide," she repeated, incredulous. "Craig, what I'm trying to do is maintain some semblance of normalcy for my children and myself. What I'm trying to do is have relationships that aren't scrutinized and dissected by strangers. What I'm trying to do is be a human being who happens to be famous, not a famous person who's forgotten how to be human." Craig shifted uneasily in his chair, his earlier confidence slipping away as he finally began to realize he had pushed too far. "Kelly, I didn't mean to suggest," he started, but Kelly cut him off sharply. "No, let me finish," she said, her voice rising slightly. "You want to know what I'm hiding?" She continued, her words trembling with emotion. "I'm hiding the fact that sometimes I cry in my car after interviews like this because I feel like I can't win. If I share too much, I'm accused of oversharing for publicity. If I keep things private, I'm accused of being secretive or difficult. I'm hiding the fact that my kids sometimes ask me why strangers on the internet think they have a right to comment on every aspect of our lives." The raw honesty in her voice was overwhelming. Crew members looked visibly uncomfortable, some glancing toward the control booth as though silently asking whether they should cut to commercial. Craig's face softened as her words sank in, shifting from defensive to concerned. But the damage was already done. "I'm hiding the fact," Kelly continued, her voice quieter but no less powerful, "that I sometimes wonder if the price of this career is worth it when I have to justify my basic human need for privacy to people who should understand better. You have a family, Craig. Would you want every detail of your personal relationships analyzed and judged by millions of people?" Craig opened his mouth to respond, but Kelly wasn't finished. The emotion in her voice deepened, her anger now mixed with disappointment. "And you know what else I'm hiding? I'm hiding how disappointed I am right now. I've always respected you as a journalist and as a person. I thought you understood the difference between legitimate journalism and gossip mongering. I thought you knew me well enough to recognize when you were crossing a line." The studio fell completely silent except for the low hum of equipment and the faint noise from the newsroom beyond. Craig looked shaken, finally understanding the weight of his misstep. "Kelly, I think maybe I misunderstood," he began, his voice noticeably softer. But Kelly's expression had hardened into calm resolve. "No, Craig, you understood perfectly," she said coldly. "You just chose to prioritize what you thought would make good television over basic human decency. You chose to push someone who was clearly uncomfortable because you thought it would get you a moment people would talk about." She paused, turning briefly toward the camera before looking back at him. "Well, congratulations. You've got your moment. People will definitely be talking about this." Craig's face had gone pale. He struggled to find words, desperate to salvage what remained of the interview. "Kelly, I never intended," he started, but Kelly cut him off again, her tone unwavering. "Your intentions don't matter as much as your actions," she said firmly. "And your actions today have shown me that you're willing to make your guests uncomfortable for the sake of content. That's not the journalist I thought you were, and it's certainly not the person I thought you were." Her words hit him like a physical blow. Craig sank slightly back into his chair, clearly realizing that not only had he damaged his relationship with Kelly Clarkson, but he had done so on live television, in front of millions of viewers and an entire production team frozen in disbelief. "I think," Kelly said after a long, heavy pause, rising from her chair, "that this interview is over." Craig looked up at her, his expression a mix of panic and disbelief as the reality of the situation sank in. One of the most beloved entertainers in America, was about to walk off the set of one of the country's most prestigious morning shows. "Kelly, please," he said quickly. His voice now stripped of all the confident polish he had started with, replaced by a hint of desperation. "Can we just take a breath here? Maybe we got off on the wrong foot. Why don't you sit back down and we can start over?" Kelly looked down at him, disappointment etched across her face. "Start over, Craig," she repeated softly. "You can't just reset a conversation like it's a computer program. You can't unsay the things you said or undo the way you made me feel. That's not how relationships work, and it's not how respect works." She straightened her jacket, gave one final look toward the stunned audience, and then turned toward the edge of the set, the sound of her heels echoing through the silent studio as she walked away, leaving Craig and the entire Today Show team in stunned disbelief. The desperation in Craig's voice became more apparent as he realized Kelly was serious about leaving. "Look, I admit I may have pushed a little too hard," he said, trying to sound reasonable, "but that's just good journalism. Sometimes you have to ask the tough questions to get to the truth." Kelly let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "The truth? What truth were you trying to get to, Craig? Whether or not I'm dating someone? How would that information benefit your viewers? Or were you just hoping I'd give you something juicy you could use to boost your ratings?" Several crew members had now stopped what they were doing entirely, transfixed by the unfolding drama. Someone off-camera whispered frantically into a headset, presumably trying to get guidance from the control room about how to handle this unprecedented situation. "Asterisk, that's not fair," Craig protested, his professional composure completely abandoned. "Now you're making this about ratings when it's about connecting with our audience. People relate to you because you've been open about your struggles. They want to know how you're doing." Kelly shook her head slowly, her voice filled with a sadness that was perhaps even more devastating than her anger had been. "People relate to me because I choose to share my struggles in a way that helps them feel less alone," she said. "I share my experiences when I'm ready, in my own space, on my own terms. What you were trying to do was extract information from me like I was some kind of resource to be mined for content." Asterisk, she began, removing the small microphone clipped to her jacket, her movements deliberate and final. "There's a difference between authentic connection and exploitation," she said quietly, "and apparently you can't see that difference." Craig stood up abruptly, clearly panicking about how this would look and what the consequences might be. "Kelly, you're being dramatic," he insisted. "This is television. This is what we do. We ask questions, people answer them, and everyone moves on. You're acting like I committed some kind of crime." Kelly paused mid-motion, looking at him with an expression of profound disappointment. "A crime? No, Craig. But you did commit something. You committed a betrayal of trust. You took someone who came here in good faith, who trusted you to treat them with basic respect, and you decided that your agenda was more important than their comfort or dignity." Asterisk, the weight of her words seemed to hit Craig like a physical blow. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and then something approaching shame. "Kelly, that wasn't my intention," he murmured. "I keep hearing about your intentions," Kelly replied, placing the microphone on her chair. "But intentions without consideration for impact are meaningless. You intended to do your job, but you didn't consider how your approach might affect me as a human being. You intended to get good content, but you didn't consider the cost of that content to the person providing it." She looked around the studio, taking in the faces of the crew members watching this extraordinary moment unfold. Asterisk, "You know what the saddest part is?" she continued. "I actually like doing interviews. I like connecting with people and talking about my work. But experiences like this make me want to retreat, to stop being accessible, to build walls instead of bridges." Craig's voice was now barely above a whisper, Please don't let one bad interview change how you approach everything else. Kelly's expression softened slightly, but her resolve remained firm. Craig, this isn't about one bad interview, she said. This is about a pattern of behavior that treats celebrities like they're not real people with real feelings and real boundaries. This is about a culture that thinks fame means consent to invasion of privacy. Asterisk, she began walking toward the edge of the set, her movement slow but determined. Craig followed a few steps behind her, still trying to find some way to salvage the situation. What do I tell our viewers? He called after her. How do I explain this? Kelly stopped and turned back to face him one final time. Tell them the truth, Craig. Tell them that you pushed someone past their comfort zone for the sake of entertainment. And they chose to prioritize their self-respect over your show. Tell them that sometimes when you don't respect people's boundaries, they walk away. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. Tell them that being famous doesn't mean being available for consumption 24 hours a day. Tell them that celebrities are human beings who deserve the same basic courtesy and respect that everyone else does. Asterisk Craig stood frozen, clearly struggling with how to respond. Kelly went on, her tone calm but resolute. And tell them, she said, that I hope this serves as a reminder that the people they watch on television, the people who entertain them and try to bring some joy into their lives, are real people who go home to real families and deal with real struggles. We're not characters in a story that exists for their amusement. With that, Kelly Clarkson walked off the Today Show set, leaving Craig Melvin standing alone in the bright studio lights, surrounded by stunned crew members and the weight of what had just transpired. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of his visible distress as he tried to process what had just happened and figure out how to address the viewers who had witnessed this extraordinary confrontation. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the soft hum of studio equipment and the distant sounds of a newsroom. Unaware that television history had just been made, Craig stood there for several long seconds, looking like a man who had just realized the full consequences of his actions, before finally turning to face the camera with the expression of someone who knew that nothing would ever be quite the same again.